Today we're going to look at lesson 8.2, more with factoring. So today our objective is we're going to factor out a GCF from a polynomial. GCFs are something that we should start to be familiar with. We looked at them in our last lesson. So the only thing that's different between the last lesson and this lesson is now that there are addition and subtraction signs, we are not only finding the GCF, but then we need to put whatever is left over into our final answer. So let's look at this first example. We have 24x to the 6th plus 12x squared. So we're going to start it off by finding the GCF, which means I'm going to break down each number and look to see what do they have in common, and I'm also going to look to see what variables they have in common. There's a lot of different ways to multiply to break down the 24. One way is 8 times 3. Remember, 3 can be circled. That is a prime number. That means that I can't break that down other than 3 times 1. But 8 is a number that I can continue to break down. That's 4 times 2. 2 is a prime number. 4, however, is not. That can be broken down into 2 and 2. Numbers that we broke down, we can ignore. I just want to focus on the numbers that are circled. So as far as 24x to the 6th goes, count them up. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 circled numbers. So there's 3 2s, 1 3, and then x to the 6th means that there are 6 x's. 6, okay? Now I'm going to break down the 12. There's multiple ways to break down 12. One of them would be 2 times 6. 2 is a prime number, so that gets circled. 6 is 3 times 2, which both of those get circled. We can cross out the 6. That's not important to us. So 12x squared is really 2 times 2 times 3, and then x squared is x times x. So we're going to figure out what the GCF is by looking to see what they have in common. Notice that the top and the bottom row have a 2. They have another 2. They also have a 3. Notice that there are 2 x's on the top that match 2 x's on the bottom. So I'm going to multiply what they have in common back together, and that is my GCF. So you just have to focus on one of the columns, 2 times 2 times 3. That's going to give us 12. 2 x's, so x times x is x squared. So this is what we practiced yesterday. The GCF is 12x squared. So that is part of my answer. But now I'm going to be putting whatever is left over back in parentheses. So if I look at that first column, what is not highlighted? Well, there is a 2 that is not highlighted. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of my x's. So that becomes x to the 4th. The sign that's in between the two terms in my original problem is an addition sign, so I get to put an addition sign. Notice that in the bottom row, everything is highlighted. So that means that whole thing is my GCF, but I still have to put something inside of the parentheses. What happens when the whole entire row moves to the outside? You're going to put the number 1. And so this would be my final factored answer. So let's go ahead and take a look then at the second problem, 9x to the 4th minus 3x squared y. So I'm going to start breaking down the 9. 9 is 3 times 3. And then once again, both of those are what we call prime numbers. So when I circle them, there's nothing else for me to break down. So 9x to the 4th is 3 times 3, and x to the 4th means that there are 4 x's. Then I'm looking to see if I can break down the next term, 3. Well, that is a prime number, so there's nothing to circle or nothing to break down there. So 3x squared y means that we'll have a 3. X squared means we have 2 x's, and then we have a y. So now that I've broken down everything, I'm looking to see what do those two rows have in common. Well, there's a 3 in both of those rows. There is not only 1 x, but there's 2 x's. Okay, that's it as far as what they have in common. So I am going to multiply one entire row back together of what is highlighted, and that's going to give me 3x squared. But remember, that's your GCF. That is not your final answer anymore. That goes on the outside. In parentheses, we are going to be putting whatever is left over from each of those rows. In the top row, there's a 3, an x, and an x. So when I multiply those back together, that gives me 3x squared. there is a subtraction sign in between my two terms. So I bring down that subtraction sign, then I look at the bottom row. The only thing that's not highlighted in the bottom row is a y. So that's going to finish the rest of my parentheses, and this would be my factored answer. Looking at problem number 3, 14x to the third y minus 20x y to the fifth. Let's start by breaking down the 14. 14 is 7 times 2. They both happen to be prime numbers, so they both get circled. So we can start listing all of our terms. So 7 times 2, x to the third means there are 3 x's, and then there is a y. Moving over to the 20, I can break that down in multiple ways. One of them is 4 times 5. 5 is a prime number, so that gets circled. 4, we break that up into 2 times 2. I can ignore the 4. Notice how there are 3 circled numbers. So when I'm thinking about 20x y to the fifth, I want 2 2's, a 5. We want 1x. Y to the fifth means I want 5 y's. Once I have all of that, now I'm looking at each row and seeing what do both of them have in common. Well, there's a 2 on both the top and the bottom row. There's an x in both the top and the bottom row, and there is one y that they have in common. So multiply what we have all together highlighted from one of the rows. 2 times x times y is 2xy. That is my GCF. So remember, that is going to start my final answer. Then in parentheses, I need to put whatever is left over. So I'm going to start with the top row. What is not highlighted? Well, 7, and then x times x is x squared. Notice that there is a subtraction sign breaking up the terms in my problems. And so I'll bring down the subtraction sign. Now I want to look at the bottom row and start multiplying anything that's not highlighted back together. So 2 times 5 is going to give me 10. And notice that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 y's. That's y to the fourth. So this would be my final answer. In our last problem here, notice that this time there are 3 terms. So we are going to break down each of those terms and look for what's in common between all 3. So starting with 2a squared b. Notice that 2 is what we call a prime number, so I can't break that down. So 2a squared b, we are going to write as 2. A squared is a times a, and then there still is a b. Looking at the next in the middle, we have a 4ab squared. 4 we can break down into 2 and 2, but those are prime numbers, so that means I'm done with that factor tree. So 4ab squared means we can do 2 times 2. There is 1a, and there are 2 b's. Looking at the last term, 6ab. 6 can be broken down into 3 times 2. Those are prime numbers, so they get circled. My factor tree is done. So 6ab means it's 2 times 3. There's 1a and there's 1b. When I'm looking for that GCF, it has to be in all 3 of those rows. So notice that there is a 2 in all 3 of those rows. But there's no more number that all the rows have in common. Notice that there is 1a that every single row has in common, and there is 1b that every single row has in common. So multiply what's highlighted back together. 2ab is my GCF. So that goes first, and then in parentheses, I'm going to be filling in each row of what is left over. So in the top row, the only thing that's not highlighted is an A. Notice that there is a subtraction sign before we get to what our second row was. So I put the subtraction sign. Looking at what is not highlighted in the second row, there's a 2 and there's a B. Notice that there is an addition sign before that last row. So then what is not highlighted in the last row? Well, a 3. This would be my final answer. You do have a checkpoint problem, so pause the video and see if you can complete this. All right, so hopefully you paused it and came up with an answer. Notice that 21x to the third y squared is really 3 times 7. There are 3 x's and there are 2 y's. When I'm looking at the next term, the 7 does not get broken down. And so we will have the 7, 2 x's, and 3 y's. Notice then there's a 7 in both those rows, there are 2 x's in both those rows, and there are 2 y's. So that means that putting them together, my GCF is 7x squared y squared. That is not my final answer anymore. I am going to, in parentheses, put whatever is left over. In the top row, the 3x is not highlighted. There needs to be a subtraction sign breaking up these terms. The only thing not highlighted in the last row is a y. And this would be your final answer.